With all the nutrition information that's out there, it can be really hard to separate fact from fiction. That's why today we're diving in and debunking some of the most common nutrition myths. So let's get started. The first myth I'd like to start with is calories in versus calories out. Let me start by saying creating a calorie deficit is key when wanting to lose weight, but it's not the only thing that plays a big part of that. Corticosteroid use can change hormones around, making it harder or easier to lose weight, on top of other chronic disease states. So you want to make sure you're getting the most individualized approach. That's why I recommend an RMR to know exactly what your baseline is and how many calories you're burning. The next myth I'd like to debunk is fat makes you fat. Fat is essential for hormone production on top of many other things. This is a decade-old myth that I'm ready to crush. Fat is important for hormones, absorption of vitamins like A, D, E, and K, which are fat soluble, and it's important for keeping you full and satiated throughout the day. Fat plays a huge role in the ability to regulate blood sugar. Another myth is that low-fat or packaged diet foods are healthy alternatives to meals. This is not true. A lot of low-fat products need to be packed with other things like sugar, trans fats, saturated fats, and they do not equivalent to a healthy and balanced meal. Everyone needs a probiotic. This is something I believed even early into my career, but it's just not true. Some people may be resistant to certain strains of probiotics, and they may not receive the benefits like others do. It can lead to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which can cause bloating and gas. So something I recommend is getting a gut zoomer. That way you can find exactly what microbiome is in your gut and produce a customized protocol for your probiotics. Carbs make you fat and you have to cut them out to lose weight. This is something a lot of people believe, but in reality, carbs or glucose are our muscle's main source of fuel, and cutting them out completely can lead to the loss of muscle. Yes, the scale may say the weight that you want it to, but if we test objectively, you'll find that you're actually losing muscle and not fat. Foods high in cholesterol will raise your total cholesterol. This is something that we've been told for decades, but in reality, dietary cholesterol has no effect on total cholesterol. Things like eggs and shrimp are really nutrient-dense foods. If someone's concerned about their overall cholesterol, they need to take more into consideration prepackaged foods, processed foods, or overconsumption of trans and saturated fats. Something I hear from clients all the time is that their doctor mentioned that eating high amounts of protein is going to cause damage in the kidneys. There's absolutely no evidence that links high protein consumption to poor kidney function in conjunction with a balanced diet. Now, if you're predisposed to kidney infections or another chronic disease that affects your kidneys, that is definitely something you're going to watch out for. But for the average individual, high protein diets are not only going to keep you satiated, but support muscle growth. Another myth that I'd like to debunk is that eating disorders only affect women. While women are more likely to speak up against eating disorders or having a bad relationship with food, this does not mean that it doesn't affect men. Bad relationships with food or eating disorders are non-discriminatory. Anyone can have an eating disorder. And this links to restriction of certain foods, cutting out food groups completely, under-eating, and fad diets. How many times have you been told that you need to eat every 2 hours in order to lose weight? This is just not true. You need to find out your RMR to know exactly how much you should be eating. And sporadic and small meals were linked to chronic diseases like IBS, metabolic disorder. A well-rounded, balanced diet with 3 main meals a day supports a healthy metabolism, healthy gut, healthy brain function, and supports fat loss.
Did you know that sauna was invented by the Finns over 2,000 years ago? There's a say that goes in Finland, sauna is a Pullman pharmacy. So they say that because sauna has a lot of benefits. It benefits you mentally, benefits you physically. When it comes to physics, as far as athlete, you know how sometimes those of us who have coaches or trainers, they usually said, you know what, an active recovery is better than a passive recovery. Why is that? So the sauna gives you the same value of a low activity exercise. A lot of time it promote vasodilation. So with HIIT, the HIIT promote vasodilation. What that does, it would increase the blood flow. When it increase the blood flow, new nutrition come to the muscle and we recover faster. And on top of that, with vasodilation also would facilitate the lymphatic system. It'll actually facilitate the flush of the lactic acid in your body. So that way we're able to recover faster. Sauna can also lower blood pressure. That's why sometimes they say if you are on blood pressure medication, you gotta be careful going to the sauna because as far with the vasodilation, it will lower your blood pressure.
Today, let's talk about heart rate zones and what we actually look at when we do VO2 testing so that you can get the most bang for your buck. So a lot of times we get this huge confusion out there about saying, let's train out zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, but where is it that you're getting the most bang for your buck? And why are you training for that specific thing, okay? So when it comes to the zones, we actually have 5 different zones and they get divided into a couple other subsections. So today I'm gonna go over them. Here we have my lovely graph, which is based on intensity. So when we do our VO2, we're actually looking at carbohydrates, this little blue line right here, and fats, our green line right here. So as you get higher on the intensity scale, the way that you produce energy and take energy actually shifts. As you get more intense, carbohydrates is gonna jump up. As you get more intense, fats are actually gonna go down. That's normal, that's what happens in our body. At rest, we burn the most fats. I'll talk about that later in a minute. But when we look at zones, this is how we break it into pieces. So from resting, all the way to just a little bit more than resting, is your zones 1 and 2. So this is very low intensity. As we get more efficient, we eventually hit what's called zone 3. This is where your body actually crosses over fats and carbohydrates. This is the most effective way to train when you're trying to burn the most fats for the longest time. Okay, this is also called your metabolic efficiency, and it's also considered your aerobic threshold. These are all synonym to each other, but right here, when it comes to training, it's kind of like a light, moderate run, let's put it like that, versus a very low intensity run. So if you're gonna burn fat, this is the idea. Right here is where you're gonna burn the most fat at the lowest intensity that you can. After that, you eventually get to the point where we hit this thing called RER of 1. It just means respiratory exchange ratio. Basically, the amount of carbohydrates you burn exceed the amount of fats. Or the synonym to that would be that you're taking in more, you're releasing more CO2, carbon dioxide, versus oxygen, which means that you're burning so much of this guy right here that you can't buffer enough. That's how our body works. The more carbohydrates we burn, the more CO2 is released, the more our body needs to buffer out all of that. And what happens is at this point, your body can't buffer anymore. It just can't. You start feeling the burn, you start feeling the ache, and you're just like, ugh. And if you continue on that pace, you eventually hit what's called, in the running world, bunk. You hit the wall, which is not fun. So this is actually broken down into different things. We have this space right here, which is zone 4. This big space between the two, right? I'm gonna put my little notes over here on the side. So you wanna consider this as moderate intensity. And then this is moderate to high. And then that gets divided into 2 things, because the next one will be working right at this threshold. You're working right at it. You're super close to it. Your heart rate is right at the point where you're about to cross over to anaerobic, but you're not. this is actually working right at the threshold. So here we're actually calling that anaerobic threshold. If you work right on top of that, that line is actually considered to be zone 5. Zone 5. So at zone 5, this is where you get the most bang for your buck if you're trying to gain some muscle endurance, if you're trying to produce more power, and if you can maintain that. That's where zone 5 is. That's where you're gonna burn the most calories, by the way. Then anything after that. So this is gonna be where you train the most and you can sustain it. For a high velocity, short bursts, you can stay there for about a minute or two if you're really well trained. And then the very last one, which is called 5B, is your max. So maximal means sprints. You're at your max heart limit, you're at the absolute brink of the most you could get out of yourself, and you can only go for a short distance. That's the highest point. So these are basically for my short running athletes, sprinters, side to side, very stop and go. That's where we want to train those. So when it comes to training, and this is how we play it out, and this is the best way to do it, is we want to be within, I'm going to bring my little guy over here on the side. We want to do intervals between zone 3 and your threshold. This is where you get the most bang for your buck. If we could play within these two numbers. Now on the days that you need to recover just a little bit and you feel like doing something, then yeah, we'll put you over here. We'll put you in zone 1, zone 2. It's not hard, it's not strenuous. You can do it for a long time and you actually get a nice recovery from it. You get a better recovery at those two zones than anywhere else. So a typical program would look like, okay, let's hit a couple seconds at threshold, and then let's go back, let's go into a moderate zone 3, where it's not too tough, but it is somewhat challenging. That way you burn the most fats. Now, you could use this for almost anything and anybody. If you have a cardiovascular problem, we would do the same thing. The only difference is that the perceived intensity is gonna look different. If someone has a bad heart, walking could be challenging. So their intervals will be based on a 2-mile-per-hour walk and then jumping up to a 3-mile-per-hour walk and then coming back down. That is considered an interval. That is changing from an intensity to another intensity, right? So when it comes to all of that, it's mostly heart rate that we want to look at. So curveball. If you have someone that uses a beta blocker or something that suppresses their heart rate, this kind of gets thrown out the door. But instead of using this, we would use something else called RPE. Rate of perceived exertion. It just means how you feel. And we could actually correlate all the zones to the RPEs, right? So zone 1, zone 2 will basically be between 7 and 9. Zone 3, you'll be looking at 10 to 13. You can think of this 2 as 14 to 15. Anything above 16, or we can be more specific, 16 to 18. And then this is max effort. So it'd be 20 to 21. So that's another way that we can actually program people depending on whether you have a disease or not. And then I could get more thorough with that and we could convert it into units of energy, which is METs. I'm not gonna go that far with you guys, but we can. Now, let's break this down a little bit more and why it's always a good idea to do higher intensity and do intervals. So like I said, our body at rest actually uses more fats than carbohydrates. So a lot of people say, well, I'm just gonna train there because I wanna burn fat. That's not always the case. You're actually burning all fuels at the same time. Your body works in such an intelligent manner, it just decides which one it's gonna go first versus the other. So you're always gonna be using fats, carbs, and even a little bit of protein. The only thing is that this molecule is huge versus this guy, he's not so big. Neither is protein. So the more intensity stuff is why we use carbohydrates more, because it's shorter. We need to cut this guy real quick. We need energy fast, ASAP, versus this long chain that I gotta break down that I can't use right away. But the idea of all this is to convert it into energy, which is ATP, adrenal triphosphate. And of course, then we go into the phosphate system and we go all those things, but I'm not gonna get into that in this talk. Back to what I was gonna demonstrate a little earlier, which is when we do testing, we can actually see in live time the efficiency of how your body works using fats and carbohydrates. So right here, low intensity, zone 1 and 2, right? Let's say you're burning 100 calories while you're doing that training. 60% of it is gonna be fats. The rest is gonna be carbohydrates. Now we have zone 3 and even 4. 50% of it is gonna be fats. The other percentage is gonna be carbohydrates. And then right here at the high intensity, we have zone 4, because remember, it's a subset. Zone 4B is typically that. I'm gonna put it here, and then zone 5. That's where you're gonna burn the most calories, 300 calories overall. You're only gonna use 40% fats. So now you'll be saying, well, I'm only gonna be using 40% fats on that. Why should I even be training there? Check this out. This is what people don't notice. It's a percentage of the total. So if you're burning 60% of 100, you're talking about 60 calories, right? Let's make that a little neater. Talking about 60 calories. If I'm burning 50% of 200, it's 100 calories. And then if I'm burning 40% of 300, you're burning about 120. So even at the higher intensity, I'm still burning more fats. So those of you guys that preach about zone 1, zone 2, just stay there forever, you're wasting your time. At least in most of the part. You're wasting your time because you're still gonna burn more fats at higher intensity regardless. And when it comes to losing weight, a kilocal is a kilocal. Calorie is a calorie. Carbohydrates, protein, or whatever the case is, it is the same, pound for pound. So, I could get even more in depth about the benefits and all this. I talked about it in the last video. Not this time. I don't want to get too crazy with it. But in the end, stop wasting your time. Do HIIT training. And then on your recovery days, then you could go into zone 1, zone 2. If you're not, then you just, again, you're wasting your time. You're not doing anything else.
Now, you're probably doing the right things at the wrong time. What am I talking about? Maybe you're trying to gain muscle and it's just not working out. You're not getting the gains you want, or you've been in this chronic pain. Your back pain is crazy and it's been happening for so long, and you've been doing everything, but nothing is working. So no amount of weights is working, no amount of physical therapy is working, no amount of chiropractic treatment is working. Why? Because you're doing the right things at the wrong time. No, your trainer doesn't suck. No, your therapist doesn't suck. No, your doctor doesn't suck. It just means you're not doing it at the right time and your body's not ready to receive these adaptations. Why? Okay, so before we go into why, we're gonna talk about motor control. So the motor control process pretty much states that your brain receives information from the environment, it processes all this information, and then it tells the body what to do. Let me show you. Your brain and your nervous system are a closed loop system. So your brain actually doesn't recognize right from left. It doesn't know what muscles are, and we don't move like the kinesiology books tells us we move. Hear me out. Your brain knows function. It knows how to flow through movement and how to produce commands. So when you go drop a pencil and you happen to pick it up, right, your brain processes this information. It sees the depth. You go and you pick up the pencil. Right? You want to go up the stairs, same situation. So you're getting a ton of data from the environment. But you have things that are helping you get data towards the brain. Right? Number one, we have our feet. Okay? In our feet, we got over 200,000 nerve endings in the bottom of the feet that provide a ton of data to the brain. Right? So all this data gets sent to the brain. And then we have our hands. Our hands provide a ton of information to the brain. One thing that you probably never thought of was actually your gut, right? So your gut provides a lot of spatial awareness to the brain. We actually have more nerve endings in our gut than we do in our spinal cord. A little fun fact, right? So that sends information to the brain. And the thing that sends the most amount of information to the brain, your eyes. All right, so let's see here. Boom. So your eyes are sending information to the brain. And what does the brain do with all this information? Your brain is going to go ahead and process all this data like a supercomputer. Right? Now, when it processes all this information, for example, like when you saw that pencil fall, right? It's processing the speed of how it's falling. It knows how firm it is on the ground, and it knows the depth perception. So how far it needs to go to pick up that pencil, right? So it's processing all that data, and then it sends a command throughout your nervous system. Right? And it runs this electrical signal runs through the brain, and when you complete the function, it goes through the nervous system, right? Your brain says, check, complete, we finished it. So that's a motor control process. Now, why does this affect whether we're gaining muscle or we still have pain? Here goes. Right? When we have damage to a certain tissue, an example of fascial structure. So if you don't know what fascia is a thin layer that wraps our entire body around. It's actually the toughest material in the body. It's known to be the skeleton of the nervous system because all of our nerve endings run through the fascia. And it's the most important tissue. Right? We absorb tension and produce forces and do so many things with this tissue. So when we damage this tissue, it's like we're damaging our motherboard or our circuitry. Right? So when we damage this tissue, we end up creating this blockage in the signal, right? What happens is that trauma or that scar that we have in the fascial structure, whether we had a surgery, whether a dog bit us, whether your little brother stabbed you with a pencil, whatever it is, right? If you look at your scars, right, there's a little damage to the fascial structure. So that's gonna cause a blockage here, right? And in causing the blockage there, when your brain is going through the motor control process and it sends out a signal, it all gets lost there. And then what happens, you're gonna receive a diluted signal, right? So it's a smaller, broken up signal throughout the body. So some things are gonna work how they're supposed to, some things are not. An example, let's say you're not recruiting or you're not receiving enough signal to your glutes. So you're not gonna recruit 100% of your motor units, which are your muscle fibers. And if you don't have 100% contracture rate, when you go do your deadlifts, or for the women, you go do your mule kicks and your hip extensions, right? And if you're not recruiting 100% of that, you're only working a portion of those muscle fibers. So guess what's gonna happen? You're not gonna get the gains that you want. The work that you're putting in is not gonna show, right? So the input is not gonna be a desired output, right? So you want a bigger butt, you're doing all this stuff, but your butt is not recruiting 100%, you're not gonna get a bigger butt. So now they say you're in pain. If you're in pain and you're trying to work on your back because you hurt your back when you were picking up your son, if this is going on, right, no amount of therapy that you're doing is gonna help you. That's why sometimes you might be doing therapy for a couple weeks and you say, hey, I feel the same, nothing's happening. Or maybe you go get a massage and you feel good for today and then you feel bad again in 2 days, right? Why? Because this motor control process is disrupted, right? So our job is to find out, what is this? Your job should be to find out, what is this? So you really have to understand the body. But if you're not receiving any gains, take a look at what's happening in your motor control process and what's happening with motor function. Because if your muscles are not recruiting at 100%, something is preventing it. And it might be the environment, it might be how your brain is processing the data from the environment, or it might be this motor control process and how your brain sends out these commands and receives these feedback loops. Super, super, super important. Okay? So this is why I say you might be doing the right things at the wrong time, because you could be doing all the right things, but if everything is being stopped right here, we're wasting our time. We just went over motor control. and the importance of that process when it comes to gaining muscle, getting rid of pain, getting stronger, getting faster. Now, what if you don't understand or don't know how to solve the mystery of what's happening in your motor control process, or why your body's not firing and functioning how it's supposed to? I'll give you a quick, easy tip, super hack that's gonna speed up your rate of contractual forces within each muscle fiber. Super simple, one word, isometrics. Okay. Isometrics are by far the best thing you can do to increase motor unit recruitment within your muscle complexes. Why? Because you're increasing time under tension, right? You're increasing volume, right? And you're forcing these muscles or these motor units to contract for a long period of time. This is the best thing you can do, and it's even better if you do it right before your training session. There's 3 things you can do before your training session. Number 1, right? What I would like for you to try is do some isometrics. So if you have a lower body day, or let's say call it a push day, why don't you try doing a split squat, hold, and try to hold that for 60 seconds. Do that for 2 rounds. Go hit a half a push-up, hold that for about 60 seconds, and then hold a plank for about 60 seconds, right? You're gonna do that 2 times over, right? And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna go into your jumps. I want you to start jumping. You need to hit high velocity. Why? Because velocity-based training or explosive, plyometric, and ballistic training are gonna make sure your central nervous system is firing up. So we just now forced all your motor units to recruit. Okay? And now we're forcing the CNS to recruit those motor units as fast as possible. And now when you go lift, you're gonna be lifting with maximal effort, maximal contractual forces, maximum efficiency. So now you're gonna do your regular bench press, you're gonna go do your regular squats, you're gonna do your power cleans. You're gonna be able to maximize that session because everything is working even better. So you're potentiating the effort that you're putting in during those sessions. If you do those 3 things, specifically the isometrics, you're gonna have a way better training session, and I guarantee your gains are gonna go off the charts, baby.